we are going to talk about.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to put in all the break and stuff now. Ruined it. We need to sit up again. Today we're going to talk about the never-ending narrative around BIM, but in particular BIM for QSs. QS being quantity surveyors, cost managers,
cost specialists,
cost engineers, and of course, we're not defining the organization that the QS or cost manager works within. We're talking about the specialization and discipline of the cost manager and QS. So we're going to look at some topics, BIM for QSs, and what does that mean, that interaction?
And how does it, how is incorporated in the current process?
Yeah. The advantages of BIM for QSs. We're going to look at a little bit of disadvantages.
And disadvantages.
Which there is, I guess. And then we're going to look at BIM and the future for QSs. Our cost managers, I guess the QS or quantity surveyor is known in some countries, but cost managers, cost engineering, estimating maybe would also be a part of this process. So BIM for QSs. With the development of BIM over the last number of decades, all the stakeholders have some type of involvement within building information management or building information modeling. And the quantity surveyor and cost manager, I guess, are one of those stakeholders. We can see that the dimensions, as we talked about on previous podcasts, the fifth dimension being cost management is, I guess, the QS, quantity surveyor's role and responsibility on projects.
Is the discipline or the dimension in which they will produce and from which they will read the project, right? From the cost perspective, from which perspective they will look at the project.
Yeah, so on which dimension or which information they prepare and deliver within the project life cycle. And again, we're looking at the discipline and not particularly the stakeholder companies like consultant or contractor. This is purely the quantity surveyor. So BIM for quantity surveying then and cost management it's an interesting topic at the moment because we see a lot of resistance in the marketplace at the moment from a quantity surveying's perspective. The challenges that they're facing in relation to the information they're receiving and how kind of we, I guess, are working with that information. That becomes a big question really is, can BIM work for quantity surveyors in the way we've always worked in terms of a process? Is it possible?
I think at the moment there is resistance to it because it's very new, but also it's happening very, very fast. So I think that when we have been transitioning into technology, we started with the phone and then we moved into some sort of phone without a cable, but really the impact to our process of making a call didn't really change. It was only the hardware, the machine, right? Now we are looking at a technology that doesn't only make a change into the tool or the machine we are operating with. It's actually changing the way we think and the way we operate into it and the process that we have been using for ages and centuries. That's why might be a little bit more of resistance.
So our day-to-day process of quantification and cost estimating and change management and reporting is now changing. We have to, as quantity surveyors, consider how we interact and engage with other stakeholders because it is changing. The advantages of BIM, of course, is standardization. It's using the power of data and information to advance and enhance other stakeholders' deliveries. And from a quantity surveying perspective, this is something that is now quite unusual, I would say, because we now need to use information prepared and produced by other stakeholders, and that information needs to be accurate, needs to have a quality level, needs to have an information level that allows us to do our job. So you are now relying on other stakeholders to deliver this quality. Whereas if we go back a number of decades, receiving information in an analog or 2D format allowed us a lot of freedom to decide what that information was saying to us. What did that drawing say to me?
Room for interpretation,
Exactly,
let's say.
Exactly. And that's really what we're talking about actually at the moment is that interpretation of information. Now, because we're using digital information, we don't have the room to interpret the information. We don't have the freedom anymore of deciding what that information is telling us on that, as we did on that 2D drawing. And that is having a big impact on the quantity surveyor's mindset and role and responsibility, I would say.
And you were saying to allow us to do our job. And I think that maybe we can touch down later in the podcast about, or in this episode, when we are looking to the future, because maybe that job that we are doing is also subject to revision, right?
Yeah.
It's not only that the information or the format of the information we receive and the process in which we produce that information has changed. Maybe the information we produced and the job we perform is also different.
It has to be, because what is happening right now, all stakeholders, their traditional role and responsibility, or maybe even I would say their delivery, has been impacted by this building information modeling and the availability of the technology that now enables us to drive more efficiency in the process, I would say. So what is BIM for QSs then? What is BIM for cost managers and quantity surveyors? I guess from our experience, it is enabling us to be more interactive and collaborative with the other stakeholders. It is requiring us to be
more involved,
much more involved,
understand better the project,
but also to understand better the other stakeholders' process and delivery as well. How
can they support us? Yeah, right.
Basically, how can they support us in their production of that information? Like a very simple example for me is when we look at the architect's process of designing. Their evolution within the 3D environment is geometry-based and it's element-based, as in a door is a door. It has kind of further information relating to that door, but it is a singular element. It's a door. Whereas
the evolution in terms of developing that design is also material-based most of the times. If we look at this specific discipline, right? Qualities and material-based.
Yeah. Whereas if we talk about the plumbing, for example, I think that's a good one, which is the mechanical aspect of the building.
It's functional.
It's functional and system-based.
And then the very, very, very last piece is actually the geometry that fulfills that functional requirement. Yeah.
So like you can have a type of steel pipe in your design, but that steel pipe might be associated with many different systems, and an engineer in that modeling process needs to allocate that particular building element to a system so the system can be understood. Whereas the architectural and construction element is an element. It's not associated with a system. It's associated, as you mentioned, with a material and quality level. So that, I think, for me a number of years ago was an eye-opener, because we had many discussions with our architects and engineering colleagues about the need to be system-focused on the MEP, where the value is for both us, the contractor and the client, at looking at the design from a system-based, and also obviously for the engineer themselves, because it needs to be described.
In a way, we can support them as well, because I mean, if we have a need for any of those systems to be developed further from a cost perspective, they don't necessarily know it. Yeah. So actually a way to support the process might be like focus on these areas because they have a greater monetary value to the project. Therefore, the least uncertainties we the least risk we have, allowing to maybe the contingency to be, open and distributed to other systems or other parts of the project in architectural.
And often that additional, I wouldn't call it additional qualities. I would say that more focused development is not more or less time consuming. And that's something very important to understand.
It's just changing the planification or the planning on how the development of the project will go, how the LOD, the level of detail on the project will be scheduled and planned. But for that, as quantity surveyors can support that by actually defining what are the cost drivers.
Yeah. So if we reflect back again to the opening kind of element of this section, which is BIM for quantity surveyors, really what it's doing for us is it's removing a lot of the administrative process in our delivery. I would say manual quantification is
time consuming
and administrative, so by removing that, we as a profession are becoming much more efficient. But I will caveat that only if we're involved in the development of the information with the design team.
And if we understand that process.
And the only way you can understand the process is by getting involved in the conversation. We need to learn this.
And building the experience around it. You're not going to find a book that will explain this. Not yet, maybe in the future. but right now it's not being taught.
That's a very interesting
point. You are not
point,
getting education about this.
Yeah.
So the only way to actually build that understanding and getting your mind around this is actually being involved in it.
Yeah, and it's a very good point about education. This is something that's not currently being taught as far as we can see, and it's something that becomes very important on a project basis in reality. So BIM for QS is going to, or is currently, improving efficiency. I would also argue that it's improving accuracy. It is improving, again, efficiency, but time and cost for the client, because we can now reduce the amount of time it takes us as a profession to prepare cost estimates and bills of quantities. I would say tender and procurement analysis is reduced because of standardization, which is a part of BIM, of course, information management. And all of this is adding a higher level of quality and security to the project.
It's improving timing as well, in meaning how fast or how real time we are able to react to some of the budget deviations or design developments that might be cost drivers and need to be reported. Another advantage is, we have now the technology available for reporting, so we are no longer printing and in paper, and that might be one of the easiest and quickest tasks that actually everybody has shifted into, right? Yeah. Maybe because of the recent pandemic. We are no longer printing and just handing in a report with a staple. No. We are now printing into PDF, which actually is allowing us to feed into the data in common data environment, but we also need to understand that data needs to be structured in a way for a machine to be reading eventually. But that's
part of the journey.
That's part of the journey, and that's one of the tasks that we have changed the fastest. Maybe we are reporting in PDF.
I would say another BIM for QS type reflection is that it's improving our engagement on the project and improving our engagement with the design team. I guess olden days, I don't know if we can say that or not, because maybe it's still been kind of managed today in that way on some projects. If we wait till the end of the project design stage, or the end of even the entire design process and begin to calculate and estimate the project, we are 100% for sure going to be over budget. And there's nothing worse.
Or under budget, which is bad.
It could be as bad, exactly. Yeah. But there's nothing worse than going back to your fellow project team and telling people we're over budget and we need to either redesign or the project is stopped or whatever the case may be. And I think BIM is now informing us, allowing us to inform earlier about this potential issue, because we're not waiting to the end. We're involved in the absolute trenches with the other stakeholders. So maybe
one of those advantages is that we are no longer the carriers or bad news,
Yeah.
And now maybe we are becoming the carriers of good news or avoiding the bad news.
Exactly. And that's, I think, avoidance. It becomes proactive rather than reactive, and proactive takes planning and engagement and involvement, whereas reactive is something you need to do to fight the fire that is now filling the room. And we absolutely need to be in a proactive position as cost managers and quantity surveyors, because we're there to manage the business case. Without the business case, there is no project. Without a project, there is no job. So I would say that it's a very important role that we do have, but also that we're moving into.
And something very important that we sometimes forget, and it's this is a job for everybody working on it, but motivation and how you face the tasks that you do every day are very important. So I think it is as important to consider it as an advantage, like avoid frustration and demotivation, but actually getting a project delivered that cannot be built and need to be redesigned because of commercial or cost issues. I think that's also a huge advantage, that not to kill the motivation and bring frustration to the entire project team. And the stress and the conflict that is created once everything is a problem, right? Trying to put a solution ahead.
Generally, I would say that projects that are commercially strained are much more difficult projects to work on than projects that have comfortable budgets and high quality, generally are delivered on time.
Yeah.
But I think one of the advantages for BIM for QS is also transparency. Being able to have the discussion around certain design outputs, certain information outputs, not only with, for example, the design team, but also with the tendering contractors, for example, or even the contracted contractor. Because BIM is information-based, information delivers transparency as a byproduct, as long as it's structured, of course. We have to qualify that. It has to be structured information.
It makes the discussions more fluent, because you are talking data, and data is irrefutable. So it's like, is decisions and discussions based in facts rather than opinions, and that can only happen by, as you say, having transparency on the information behind it. Transparency being maybe the level of detail or availability of the content and scope of that information, but also understanding how to structure that data for future use.
Yeah, and I would say, reflecting back to our initial analogy of quantification in 2D, the interpretation of information is subjective. So because you're using information produced by other stakeholders, it means you need to understand that you, as the QS and cost manager, before it goes to the marketplace, that means that you've qualified it. In the, again, we'll say the olden days, but on a more traditional project delivery, you are, as a QS, if you're manually quantifying and trying to understand information, it's your opinion and subjective view of that information that gives the result that you then deliver to the marketplace. And that will cause conflict and issues, because if the information is not clear and it's your interpretation, then of course the contractor or the contractor's QS on that side will also pick up that information in a different way, meaning conflict. So that's a big advantage of building information management, building information modeling, is that it's qualified information before it goes to the marketplace.
I think, Rose, you have solved it.
Yeah.
Now it's time maybe to talk about
the disadvantages.
Not the bright side, like this, the dark side. Of
it. I guess their disadvantages is probably a strong. I think it's too strong of a word to use.
Obstacles, maybe
obstacles
or difficulties.
Difficulties
right?
would be a good one, I think, because difficulties is easier to manage than a disadvantage. It's not necessarily BIM for QS isn't a disadvantage, but it has its obstacles.
It's not a bad thing; it's just a challenge
to come around, because we now need to change the way we understand project delivery. I would say is one thing. We also need, the obstacles are, we need to now engage with the design teams much more closely than before, meaning we need to understand their process, their delivery, how they view our profession is also very important to understand, which can be an obstacle because you now need to explain what you do as a quantity surveyor, cost manager to our friends, the architects and engineers, so that they understand.
What you do with the information they produce, right? Which also, it encourages them to put a special attention of their. I've heard it in several occasions, like, oh, you guys, I think, are the first ones that are looking at our models at this stage, besides the other design disciplines. And they are really curious to understand how we use it, and they are, now that they do understand the information we use and how we use it, they actually are trying to put in place in their own processes how to make it easier for us, just because it's been used. It's not effort put for nothing.
And that's the value creation of BIM, I think, is that we can continually improve how we structure and develop information so that it streamlines the project delivery, meaning we're reducing time, reducing cost, and delivering much nicer projects. So another obstacle maybe for this is that, yes, we need to get closer to the projects. Another obstacle is that we need to be involved on the project from the beginning. We cannot come in after a concept design or a stage 2 if it's the REBA plan of works. We cannot come in after a concept design and begin to build the commercial digital process or the BIM execution planner. At that point, it's too late.
The requirements, right? The entire process is in place. Everybody is already familiar with the process. They're performing, they're producing, and suddenly you come and say, I have new requirements, guys.
Or we need to change this, or we need, if the project is set up in that way, then it becomes very difficult. And this is really...
It's not contractual, first of all. So it's not just a matter of they are willing to or they are just not willing to collaborate. It's not contractual. So now everything forward is a favor.
Or additional work or additional requirement.
It's additional scope, it's a favor.
And so for our clients, or our professional clients that are listening to this, it's very important for you guys to understand that one of the key stakeholders is your commercial and should be involved in at the very early stage. And that is something that we need to change within the industry. That's an obstacle that we need to, and again, it's not a disadvantage for BIM, right? It's just that changing culture and that changing mindset that we talked about before.
Another of those difficulties I can think of is that now our profession is not just about working as a specialist, it's also about communicating, which is something that goes beyond the technical skills. Now we really need to be communicating very actively, not only what we need, but also what we can foresee is maybe not going in the right direction, right? So that we don't wait too long for it to be mitigated. Yeah.
So those soft skills suddenly become very important. And the olden days, maybe we didn't need them because we could wait to the end, do our work and submit without interaction. But again, the collaborative need because of BIM is just absolutely increasing and forever increasing in our projects, and communication, of course, becomes a big part of that. So, but I would say the obstacles are challenges. Yes, they are, but they're you can very much overcome them.
Another of these difficulties that I would like to mention is the technology and how fast the technology is being able to be adjusted to what we need. So the fact that not so many cost specialist professionals are already involved in these processes mean that there is no demand in the market for the softwares to actually invest and develop on what we actually need as cost professionals. So we may have some tools already available, but not necessarily fulfilling all the needs. And because this is going fast, I think that the development on softwares also requires quite a long time.
Yeah.
So the fact that we don't really have a defined process for BIM as cost specialists that is aligned and totally mastered means that the software developers cannot really understand what is necessary as a tool to feed and support that process.
It's a supply and demand issue, right? If we're not demanding it as a profession, then why would the supply? They can't create what we don't know we need yet.
Yeah.
They need to follow what the demand is, and we won't know what we need until we get involved in the projects in this way.
So in a way, putting as excuse that the technology is not there yet, and therefore we are not going to do anything about it, then that only makes it worse, right?
And I think one of the other obstacles now at the moment is that this is an inevitable evolution. You cannot back away or hide from this as a professional QS or cost manager. You also can't back away or hide from it as a consultant QS company or organization anymore. It is inevitable within the industry. It's like the mobile phone, the phone you talked about earlier on. Back in the day, it used to be a card, it used to be at home, then it became mobile, now it's digital. Now we have all of the applications within our phone. It's an evolution that is kind of unstoppable.
And either you have a mobile phone or you cannot make a call because there is no cabins anymore, right?
There's no landlines
or cabins, public telephones anymore, right?
Yeah.
So either you adjust or you are left behind.
That's basically it. And that's a big obstacle because it's difficult for people to get the mind around that idea that for years we've been talking about the evolution of quantity surveying and the fact that it will die.
How fast has that been, Ross? Like the phone thing? Because I was born with landline, no phones, and public phones, and then in a matter of 15 years, everything has changed. Yeah. And now 15 years is a very, very short period for such a drastic change.
Absolutely.
And we have been working with it now for 10 years or
10
so,
years,
and it has gone very fast for the other disciplines. However, the cost discipline or the cost specialist is a little bit stuck.
Yeah, but I think the next number of years will be very interesting to see how quickly that develops. And this leads us into our final element, I guess, which is BIM and the future for QSs. It's inevitable, but we also as professionals need to write the future for ourselves, or someone will write that future for us, because we will be, regardless of whether we look at our profession as something that is valued, valuable, and needed, we will be written out of our that need by a program, by a code. So we need to get in front of what is BIM for QSs, what really is 5D, what does that mean for our profession, and how do we drive our profession into the future? And I would say that absolutely needs to start with the universities and the education that we're currently seeing. We have reviewed quite a lot of the university curriculums, and they're the same as they were back in 2005 and 1995. We have absolutely moved on from half or all of that subject matter. So there's a big step here. So again, we need to start challenging
professional bodies who are ultimately defining the requirements and standards for the profession in the industry.
They also need to get behind this.
And as individuals also, right? Yeah. Claim for them to actually adjust to this and redefine the job expectations and the job requirements.
So the future for quantity surveying needs to be driven by quantity surveyors, and really technology, not necessarily technology, but the development of the other disciplines and other sectors within the industry is ultimately going to have an effect on what we do. So we also we absolutely also need to get involved in the conversation of what we want for ourselves in the future. And that's not what we were going to be doing, what we did 10 years ago. We're not going to be doing it in 10 years' time. Sure, we're not currently doing it now within KOSMOS, what traditionally was done 10 years ago. We are fully focused on pre-construction, fully focused on digitization, fully focused on BIM as a process to deliver projects. So for anybody listening that are now thinking about this, I would say please reach out to people to talk. Reach out to us even. You can talk to us about this. We obviously love the subject matter, but I think that the future it's absolutely exciting and also changing extremely fast.
It's the responsibility of us as professionals to claim for the ultimate bodies with the power to make a change. Public entities, charter organizations, clients in our projects, and advise them on how to properly address this matter.
Absolutely. So really the future, I guess, is in our own hands, right? BIM for QSs and all of that.
We'll be talking about this in 5 years. 10 years time, revising our predictions
I hope,
of the future.
I hope not.
Of the future.
Thanks very much for listening. There's a LinkedIn link below in the show notes. We would love to connect with you.
We hope you enjoyed it and have you with us in the next one. Thank you very much.